I warned all 10 of us that played Metroid Prime Hunters and Federation Force that Sylux was unbelievably lame, but you all persisted, and I guess all of the message board shitposts from nearly 2 decades ago have been vindicated. I mean, if this is a Metroid Prime game, where is she? Dark Samus died in Metroid Prime 3, and she sure as hell isn't in this one, so already we're off on a bad foot. So at this point, I think everything about Metroid Prime 4 Beyond has already been said, but I would really like to give my personal thoughts on it. We're definitely going to be going over 4 minutes with this review, but I think it's warranted. I'll start off by saying that on some level, I can forgive unimpressive graphics and art directions, and even bad narratives from Nintendo games specifically, as long as the gameplay is serviceable. But unfortunately here with Metroid Prime 4, it completes the hat trick of shame by just being an uninspired, boring mess that stunningly exemplifies just a complete lack of originality. For example, there are 3 unique biomes, and they're forest, lava, and ice, all with the terrible and empty desert zone, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but wowee, we certainly haven't seen such a diverse planet like this before. And also, all of the new psychic abilities in this game are just the same power-ups from every Metroid game before it, but they're purple this time. And similarly, all of Samus's beams in this game are still just the wave, ice, and plasma beams from the previous games, but with Metroid Prime 2's finite ammo system tacked on. The psychic charge shot might have been a neat gimmick for the Wii Motion Control era, but here it just feels like an abrupt stoppage in the pacing whenever it's used. And to be fair, yes, the original Prime trilogy did share many of its power-ups and pretty much the same gameplay between the 3 games, but all of those games still tried to implement new ideas, or honestly gimmicks, for every entry. And as I said a moment ago, 2 had the finite ammo system and the mirrored world, 3 had the hyper mode and the energy cell progression, and all of that design philosophy for those games extended into the environments too. Said another way, no area in the trilogy feels like an exact repeat of ideas, and you'd always at least have one memorable place in each of the game, like Chozo Ruins in the first, Sanctuary Fortress in the second, or even Skytown in the third game. Compared to this game, where unfortunately anything that's memorable is not for a good reason. So enough glorifying the past, let's get more into why Beyond is such a disappointment specifically. I'll start in the widest aperture possible, and that's that the presentation, as I alluded to earlier in this game, is just really ultimately a mess. We have our elemental zones, so that's as standard as it comes, but the rest of the game's color palette is really unappealing to me, especially the Lemorne's buildings and dwellings, which tend to be colored with these sleepy, muted pastels, and the Lemorne's architecture itself is all very oddly yonic. Yeah, there's your word of the day, yonic. Look that one up. Anyway, despite this similarity, none of the areas are artistically consistent in the game, which means to me that there wasn't a single creative vision in the real world when this game was being developed. I mean, I'm supposed to believe that the Lemorne made the shamanistic temples in Fury Green, but also the evil spiked thunder base in Volt Forge. It all feels very disjointed from an artistic standpoint. As for the music, it doesn't fit all that well with this game, but I can't say that the music itself is terrible. The music just sort of lacks the punch that a lot of the older titles had, and there's maybe a few too many operatic tracks in this game as well. The sound effects are fine too, but man, could the Samus voice actor scream any louder when she's hit? So on one hand, you have the sound effects which stick out a little bit too much, and on the other, the music is basically just forgettable and you can't even really hear it for most of the game. Okay, let's get into the story. Yeah, it's dumb. The larger narrative outside of saving the Reddit NPCs is like the most generic ancient civilization chosen one plot imaginable, which I guess now Samus is the chosen one for, God, I don't even know, at least 2 or 3 alien races now. But worse are still here is because of all this frequent exposition about the Lemorne civilization going through these multiple stages, such as like the machine era to the psychic era, it's really just not that interesting in the slightest. By contrast, Metroid Prime 3 was the most linear, story-driven, and beginner-friendly of the trilogy, and this game, Metroid Prime 4, makes the mistake to double down on all of those things. The Reddit NPCs are just the lame James Gunn MCU character stock humor that amounts to constant inane talking, which I guess is a Zoomer or maybe a Gen Alpha thing, but is anybody from those generations even playing this game? I don't know, but you could remove the NPCs from the game entirely, and this game would play the exact same, except the story would also be more tolerable, and I guarantee that these NPCs were added in the time between the gameplay reveal and the release to appease modern audiences. Now for the gameplay itself. The core mechanics play very similarly here to the other Prime games, so that's fine, that's good. The residuary stuff, on the other hand, does not, and that is where it is bad. The Soul Valley Desert, which could be charitably described as a hub area, is just unacceptable to me personally, because there was no effort to even attempt to make it even interesting at all. And I feel like instead it gave the developers a very convenient excuse to make connecting areas too big and therefore justify the use of the Viola motorcycle, which I'll just come out and say unapologetically I think is also stupid and it feels misplaced in this game. I mean, did we really need a driver's license test simulator and a Mario Kart track finish cutscene? No, we did not, but unfortunately they are here. You will also be spending a lot of your time scanning, which amounts to just pure padding in this game by slowing the game down considerably. Now, I know that, of course, that the previous games had scanning, but at least in the previous games, the scans added flavor text to the world, like in any of the previous trilogy games where you would read about all the horrific ways the corpses of space pirates met their end by having the big baddie Samus was about to fight, but no, here it's just basically activate to use, and yet Samus still has to physically touch the button or whatever it is, and activation complete. I mean, really riveting stuff. So to me, whatever the Skinwalker version of Retro Studios made Breath of the Metroid by giving Samus psychic and summoning powers like Link does in Breath of the Wild, they also made incredibly linear maps and had a hub world that was so barren and so empty, they were required to make the green crystals regenerate as the colorless crystals. So there was actually something to break up the desert even a little, as opposed to just going from point A to point B, even though it makes it ultimately just a chore to track down the remaining green crystals that you need to progress to the final area of the game. And a quick note about the green crystals, most of these clickbait content creators exaggerate how many green crystals are needed to progress, but I will concede it is a lot, and I did collect the lion's share after driving around drunk for about an hour, but this is required collection, and it shouldn't be here anyway at all. Anyway, unfortunately nowadays, normies love to dogpile any game that is average to be an unmitigated disaster instead, because that's good for clout, grifting, and clickbait. But while I won't profess that this game is total trash, the game is definitely and noticeably flawed in many ways, as I think I've made clear over the course of this review. But admittedly, having a conversation about what worked and what didn't does get harder and harder with releases like this. So in closing, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is basically a mediocre video game by itself, being that it is polished by Nintendo standards and is seemingly bug-free, but Beyond is a bad game by Metroid standards. So ultimately, my experience with Metroid Prime 4 Beyond was that the game waffled between simultaneously hand-holding me as the player for most of the game, while also abandoning me entirely for other less clear progression and puzzles occasionally. So if I wasn't annoyed with the game, I was bored with it. And if I wasn't bored with it, I was annoyed. Needless to say, that's not a very good formula. Therefore, with Metroid Prime 4 Beyond being the worst of the first-person primes, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond drops to a C+. Yeah, I think with Dark Samus dead, it's time to retire the Prime series.